In-depth look at the Sydney hostage crisis and the domestic security situation in Australia. We're joined by Peter Jennings. He's Executive Director for the Australian Strategic Policy Institute in Canberra, Australia. Peter, let me get your sense. I mean, this guy was obviously on the radar. He'd been involved allegedly in the murder of his wife, also facing more than 40 sexual and indecent assault charges. Police knew about him. Any indication that he was planning something like this?
Well, I guess not. Otherwise, it would have been unlikely for him to have been released on bail relating to those charges that you've just mentioned. However, he had a long history. Coming from a defence background as I do, I'm aware that he wrote some absolutely appalling letters to the families of Australian soldiers who'd been killed in Afghanistan. He was clearly a person prone to violence. And I think suffering from some serious mental issues as well. But obviously there was no signs prior to his hostage taking in the cafe that he was likely to engage in a terror act of this nature.
There are reports indicating that Australia is increasing and strengthening its domestic security situation. Any idea what officials are doing?
Well, this has been happening for some time. We have a 5-level threat warning system relating to counter-terrorism, and several months ago that level was raised to high, which said that an attack, a terrorist attack, was possible. When that happened, our state police forces and our federal police and our intelligence agencies reviewed the procedures that needed to be put in place to deal with a terror attack. And I think the performance of those agencies in handling this siege crisis was actually very well coordinated and well handled given the terrible circumstances. What's probably likely to happen now is that the federal government will consider raising our terror threat level to the highest level, which is known as extreme. And I think once again that would force the security community to go through a process of looking at how it would deal with particularly the risk now of copycat attacks, which I imagine will be high at least for several weeks.
Prime Minister Tony Abbott went on the air there after the siege ended. He said there are lessons to be learned from this. What do you believe the lessons are?
I think they mostly relate to dealing with these so-called lone wolf terrorists. They seem to be one of the hardest targets for intelligence communities to attack because there is no network, there is no coordinated planning amongst a group of people, which means that in fact the ability to listen into communications is so much harder. When it comes to dealing with lone wolf terrorists, I think you have to rely instead on understanding the background of such individuals, whether or not they've had prior engagement with the police, whether or not they've been involved in dealing with mental health facilities, for example. And then we have a really tricky set of judgments to make about what it is that actually triggers those types of individuals from perhaps just being unbalanced loners into actually being motivated to undertake terror attacks. But we've seen there's a common pattern, as your earlier reports indicated, between this attack and some of the pathologies of behaviour that we've seen in Canada and in New York recently. And I think all of the concerned intelligence and police agencies are going to have to look at how we deal with these individuals rather than more complex networks of terror groups.
Peter, one final question. Obviously, this has gripped Australia for 17 hours watching all of this. We heard that Australia is being tested. What's your general sense of how Australians are coping with this, taking all of this in?
Well, I think one of the most positive things to come out of the experience was the rise through social media of something called the I'll Ride With You campaign, which was Australians offering to ride public transport with Muslim Australians who might feel concerned today in particular about reprisals. That says something, I think, extremely positive about Australian society, that type of tolerant and easygoing approach should be applied. I hope that's where we stay going forward. I think it's critically important at this point that there isn't an overreaction, and in particular that our communities work together to deal with this threat in a collective and peaceful way. And I'm optimistic that is how Australia will deal with this situation.
We're going to leave it there. Peter Jennings joining us live from the capital of Australia. Thank you.